I never thought I would be standing in a courtroom, fighting my own father for the roof over my head. The air conditioning hummed too loud in that sterile space, making the room feel colder than it already was, and I could smell the faint scent of old wood polish mixed with the anxiety sweat of too many people packed into those hard benches. My father sat 3 rows ahead of me, his shoulders rigid, his gray hair freshly cut for the occasion. He would not turn around. He had not looked at me in 6 months. Not since the day he told me I had no right to the house my mother left behind. My mother died on a Tuesday in March. I remember because it was raining, one of those soft spring rains that makes everything smell like wet earth and new grass. She had been sick for 2 years, and by the end, her body was so frail I was afraid to hug her too tight. But her mind stayed sharp until the very last week. She held my hand in that hospital room, the beeping of machines creating a rhythm that still haunts my dreams, and she whispered to me that everything would be okay. She said the house was mine. She said she had made sure of it. I believed her. Why would I not believe my own mother as she lay dying? The house was a 2-story colonial on Maple Street, white with blue shutters, a wraparound porch that creaked in all the right places, and a garden my mother had tended for 30 years. I grew up in that house. I learned to ride a bike on that driveway. I had my first kiss on that porch swing. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with laughter and arguments and the ordinary sounds of a family living their lives. My mother planted roses along the fence every spring, and by summer they would bloom in shades of pink and red and yellow, filling the air with a sweetness that made you want to sit outside for hours. My father moved out when I was 16. It was not a dramatic exit, no slamming doors or shouted accusations. He just packed his clothes one Saturday morning while my mother made pancakes in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal. He said he needed space. He said he would still be my father. He said a lot of things that turned out to be only half true. He rented an apartment across town, a bland 1-bedroom in a complex that smelled like chlorine from the pool and old carpet. He visited on Sundays for a while, then every other Sunday, then once a month, and eventually the visits became phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent as the years went on. My mother never said a bad word about him. Even when he forgot my birthday or missed my high school graduation because he had to work, she would make excuses for him. She would say he was doing his best. She would say people show love in different ways. I think she still loved him, even after everything. I think that is why she never divorced him, why she kept his last name, why she left his picture on the mantel long after he stopped coming around. When she got sick, he showed up at the hospital exactly twice. The first time was right after her diagnosis, when the doctor used words like aggressive and stage 4 and limited options. He stood at the foot of her bed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and said he was sorry. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. The second time was 3 days before she died. He brought flowers, cheap carnations from the grocery store, and he sat in the chair by the window for 20 minutes making small talk about the weather. Then he left, and I did not see him again until the funeral. The funeral was on a Saturday. The church was full of people who loved my mother, neighbors and friends and cousins I had not seen in years. Everyone had a story about her kindness, her laugh, the way she could make you feel like the most important person in the world just by listening. My father sat in the front row next to me, stiff and silent in a black suit that looked too big for him. He did not cry. He shook hands and accepted condolences with a tight smile, and when it was over, he got in his car and drove away without saying goodbye. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he would fade back into his separate life and leave me to grieve in peace. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a letter from a lawyer. The envelope was thick and official-looking, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a notice that my father was contesting my mother's will. He claimed that as her legal husband, he had rights to the marital property. He claimed that my mother was not of sound mind when she made her will. He claimed that I had unduly influenced her, that I had manipulated a sick and dying woman to cut him out of what was rightfully his. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table in the house that was supposed to be mine, and I felt something crack inside my chest. The afternoon sun was streaming through the window, making patterns on the worn linoleum floor, and I could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. My mother had made her will 5 years before she got sick. I knew because I had been there when she did it. We had gone to the lawyer's office together, a small place above a coffee shop downtown where the stairs creaked, and the waiting room had magazines from 2 years ago. She had told me she wanted to make sure everything was in order, that she did not want me to have to worry about anything if something happened to her. The lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia with reading glasses on a chain, had explained everything carefully. My mother was leaving the house to me. She was leaving her savings account to me. She was leaving everything to me except for a few specific items she wanted to go to her sister. I asked her about my father. I asked if she was sure. She looked at me with those clear blue eyes and said she was certain. She said he had made his choice when he left, and this was hers. The lawyer Patricia became my lawyer too. I called her the day I got my father's letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She told me to come in right away. Her office still smelled like the coffee shop below, a rich dark roast smell that usually would have been comforting, but that day just made me feel sick. She read the letter, her face growing more serious with each paragraph, and then she looked up at me and said we had a fight ahead of us. She explained that in our state, spouses have certain rights to marital property, even if they are separated. She explained that my father could argue he never intended the separation to be permanent, that he and my mother were still legally married when she died, and that the house they bought together 40 years ago was as much his as it was hers. She explained that his claim about my mother's mental state was serious, that if he could prove she was not competent when she made the will, everything could be thrown out. I felt the room spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair, the old leather cracking under my fingers, and I tried to breathe. Patricia poured me a glass of water from a pitcher on her desk. The water was room temperature and tasted faintly of plastic, but I drank it anyway. She told me not to panic. She told me we had evidence on our side. She told me my mother had been very clear about her wishes, and that clarity would matter. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The next few months were a blur of paperwork and depositions and sleepless nights. I had to prove my mother was of sound mind. I had to gather medical records showing that 5 years ago, when she made her will, she was perfectly healthy. I had to find witnesses who could testify to her mental clarity. I had to relive her death over and over again, answering questions about her last days, her last words, her last wishes. My father's lawyer was a man named Richard Brennan, tall and silver-haired with a voice like smooth whiskey and eyes like a shark. He asked me questions designed to make me look like a greedy daughter who had isolated her mother from her father. He asked if I had discouraged my mother from reconciling with my father. He asked if I had told her negative things about him. He asked if I had been the one to suggest she leave everything to me. I sat in that deposition room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air too dry and smelling faintly of burnt coffee, and I answered every question as calmly as I could. No, I had not discouraged anything. No, I had not poisoned her against him. No, I had not asked for anything. She had made her own choices. She had been a grown woman with a sharp mind and a clear sense of what she wanted. But I could see how it looked. I had been the one living with her. I had been the one taking her to doctor's appointments and picking up her prescriptions and sitting with her through the long nights when the pain was too much. I had been there, and he had not. And now I was the one getting everything, and he was the one left out in the cold. Except he had left himself out. He had chosen to leave. And now he wanted back in, not because he loved her, not because he missed her, but because there was money and property involved. The house was worth $350,000. My mother's savings account had $42,000 in it. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to matter. It was enough to fight over. It was enough to destroy what was left of our family. I started having nightmares. I would dream that I came home and the locks were changed, that my father was standing on the porch with a sheriff telling me I had to leave. I would dream that I was packing my things into boxes, that I was watching strangers walk through my mother's garden, that I was losing everything she had wanted me to have. I would wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped eating well. I lost 12 pounds in 2 months. My friends told me I looked tired. My boss told me I seemed distracted. I was distracted. How could I focus on anything else when my entire life was being picked apart by lawyers and judges, and a father who suddenly cared about me only because I stood between him and money? I tried to talk to him once. I called his number on a Thursday evening, my hands trembling as I dialed. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. I asked him why he was doing this. I asked him if the money was really worth tearing apart what little relationship we had left. I asked him if he had any idea what this was doing to me. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the television in the background, some game show with Ken laughter. Then he said it was not about the money. He said it was about what was fair. He said he had been married to my mother for 43 years, and he deserved to be recognized for that. He said I was too young to understand, that someday I would see he was right. I told him my mother did not want him to have the house. I told him she had been very clear about that. I told him he was disrespecting her final wishes. He said I had manipulated her. He said I had turned her against him. He said if she had been thinking clearly, she never would have cut him out. I hung up on him. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered on the kitchen floor, and I stood there in the growing darkness, the last light of day fading through the windows, and I cried. I cried for my mother, who had tried so hard to make everything right. I cried for myself, who was losing my father all over again. I cried for the family we could have been but never were. The court date was set for October, 6 months after my mother's death. As the date approached, I felt like I was walking toward the edge of a cliff. Patricia prepared me as best she could. We went over my testimony again and again. We practiced how I would respond to difficult questions. We reviewed all the evidence, all the medical records, all the witness statements. She told me to stay calm, to speak clearly, to tell the truth. She told me the truth was on our side. But the truth does not always win. I knew that. I had seen enough of the world to know that sometimes the person with the better lawyer wins, or the person who can lie more convincingly, or the person who just gets lucky. I could not afford to lose. If I lost, I would lose everything. I would lose the house where I grew up, where my mother's presence still lingered in every room. I would lose the financial security she had tried to give me. I would lose the last gift she had left behind. And I would lose it to a man who had not been there, who had not cared, who had not earned it. The night before the court date, I could not sleep at all. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the streetlight outside move across the plaster. The house was so quiet I could hear every creak and settle, the old bones of the building shifting in the cool October air. I thought about all the nights I had spent in this room, all the dreams I had dreamed, all the fears I had faced. I thought about my mother tucking me in when I was small, her hand cool on my forehead, her voice soft as she sang me lullabies. I thought about the last time I saw her alive, her hand in mine, her breath shallow and labored, her eyes trying to tell me something I was not sure I understood. I got up before dawn and took a long shower, letting the hot water beat against my shoulders until the bathroom was thick with steam. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit my mother had bought me for job interviews, the fabric still smelling faintly of her perfume from when I had borrowed it for her funeral. I made coffee but could not drink it. I made toast but could not eat it. I stood in the kitchen as the sun came up, painting the walls gold and orange, and I tried to find some kind of courage inside myself. Patricia picked me up at 8. She was wearing a gray suit and her reading glasses, and she had a leather briefcase full of documents. She smiled at me, but it did not reach her eyes. She was nervous too. We drove to the courthouse in silence, the morning traffic thick and slow, the radio playing soft jazz that did nothing to calm my racing heart. The courthouse was a big stone building downtown, with marble floors that echoed with every footstep and high ceilings that made everyone's voices sound small. Security made me empty my pockets and walk through a metal detector. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance, like this was happening to someone else. The courtroom was on the 3rd floor. It was smaller than I expected, with dark wood paneling and rows of benches that looked like church pews. The judge's bench sat high at the front, imposing and severe. There were flags in the corners and a clock on the wall that ticked too loudly. The air smelled like old paper and floor wax, and the faint mustiness of a building that had seen too many sad stories. My father was already there. He sat at a table on the left side with his lawyer Richard Brennan. He was wearing a dark suit and a tie, his hair neatly combed, his face expressionless. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his skin more gray. He glanced at me once when I walked in, just a quick flicker of his eyes, and then he looked away. I sat at the table on the right side with Patricia. She arranged her papers in neat stacks, her movements precise and controlled. She leaned over and whispered that everything would be okay, that we had a strong case, that I just needed to stay calm and tell the truth. I nodded, but my throat was too tight to speak. The judge entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her robe swished as she walked, and when she sat down, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. She looked at both tables, her expression neutral, and then she told us to begin. Richard Brennan stood up first. His voice filled the room, confident and smooth. He laid out my father's case with the skill of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He talked about the sanctity of marriage, about the rights of a surviving spouse, about the tragedy of a man being cut out of his own home by a daughter who had taken advantage of a sick and dying woman. He made my father sound like a victim. He made me sound like a villain. I sat there listening, my hands clenched in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. Every word felt like a knife. He twisted everything, made it sound like I had isolated my mother, like I had poisoned her mind against my father, like I had stolen what was rightfully his. He talked about how my father had been married to my mother for over 4 decades, how he had worked hard to provide for his family, how he deserved to be recognized and compensated for his years of dedication. It was all lies. Or at least, it was all half-truths twisted into something ugly. Yes, they had been married for a long time. But he had left. He had chosen to leave. He had not been there when it mattered. When Richard Brennan finished, Patricia stood up. She was smaller than him, quieter, but her voice was steady and clear. She talked about my mother's right to make her own decisions, about the will that had been made years before any illness, about the medical records that proved my mother had been completely competent when she decided to leave everything to me. She talked about my father's absence, about the years he had spent away from the family, about the fact that he had only shown interest in the estate after my mother died. She called witnesses. She called the lawyer who had helped my mother make her will, Patricia's colleague who testified that my mother had been clear and decisive and had understood exactly what she was doing. She called my mother's doctor, who testified that 5 years ago my mother had been in perfect health with no signs of cognitive decline. She called my mother's best friend Margaret, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and a steady voice, who testified that my mother had talked about her decision, that she had been at peace with it, that she had wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they might give out. The bailiff, a heavy-set man with a kind face, held out a Bible and asked me to place my hand on it. The leather was worn smooth from thousands of hands before mine. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too high and thin. Patricia asked me questions first. She asked me about my relationship with my mother, about the years we had spent together, about how I had cared for her when she got sick. I answered as steadily as I could, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I talked about the hospital visits and the medications and the long nights sitting by her bed. I talked about how sharp her mind had stayed, how she had made jokes even when she was in pain, how she had planned her own funeral down to the last detail because she did not want me to have to make those decisions alone. I talked about the day we went to make her will. I described the lawyer's office, the way my mother had sat in the chair across from Patricia's colleague, her back straight and her voice firm. I described how she had explained her wishes, how she had said she wanted me to have the house because I had been there, because I had stayed, because she wanted me to have a place to call home. I described how she had signed the papers without hesitation, how she had smiled at me afterward, and said now she could rest easy knowing I would be taken care of. Patricia asked me about my father. I took a deep breath, trying to choose my words carefully. I said that he had left when I was 16. I said that he had visited less and less over the years. I said that when my mother got sick, he had come to the hospital twice. I did not say it with anger or bitterness. I just stated the facts, letting them speak for themselves. Then Richard Brennan stood up for cross-examination. He smiled at me, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had spotted weakness. He asked me if I loved my father. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, and he pounced on that hesitation. He asked again, his voice sharper. Did I love my father? I said I did not know how to answer that. He asked if that meant no. I said it meant it was complicated. He asked if I had been angry when my father left. I said of course I had been angry. I had been 16 years old. He asked if I had wanted him to come back. I said yes at first. He asked when that changed. I said I did not know. Maybe it never changed. Maybe I still wanted him to come back, just not like this. He asked if I had told my mother I was angry at my father. I said probably. I said we talked about everything. He asked if I had told her I thought he did not deserve anything from her. I said I did not remember saying that. He asked if it was possible I had said it. I said anything was possible, but I did not remember. He was trying to paint a picture of me as someone who had poisoned my mother against my father. He was trying to make it seem like I had manipulated her, that I had used her love for me to turn her against him. I could feel the trap closing around me with every question. He asked if I knew how much the house was worth. I said yes. He asked if I knew how much was in my mother's savings account. I said yes. He asked if I had ever thought about what I would do with that money. I said of course I had. Anyone would. He asked if I had made plans. I said I had thought about it. He asked what kind of plans. I said I had thought about maybe going back to school, about maybe starting my own business, about maybe just having some security for the first time in my life. He asked if those plans had motivated me to make sure my father did not get any of the inheritance. I said no. I said my mother had made her own decision. He asked if I had been relieved when I found out she was leaving everything to me. I said I had been sad. I had just lost my mother. The money was the last thing on my mind. He raised his eyebrows like he did not believe me. He asked if I expected the court to believe that I had not been at least a little bit happy about inheriting over $300,000 in assets. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I said I would have given every penny back to have my mother alive again. I said the house was not about money to me. It was about having a place that still smelled like her, that still held her memories, that still felt like home. I said I did not care about the money. I cared about honoring her wishes. He asked if I thought my father's wishes mattered at all. I said I thought my mother's wishes mattered more. She was the one who died. She was the one who left a will. She was the one who had the right to decide what happened to her things. He asked if I thought my father deserved nothing after 43 years of marriage. I said I thought he had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. The judge interrupted then. She said that was enough. Richard Brennan sat down, looking satisfied. I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs shaking so badly I almost stumbled. Patricia gave me a small nod as I sat back down next to her. I could not tell if she thought it had gone well or badly. Then my father took the stand. I watched him walk up there, his movements stiff and formal. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. His voice was steady, practiced. He had always been good at presentations, at making himself look good in front of others. Richard Brennan asked him about his marriage. My father talked about meeting my mother in college, about their wedding day, about buying the house on Maple Street when I was just a baby. He talked about working long hours to provide for his family, about the sacrifices he had made, about how much he had loved my mother. His voice got thick with emotion when he talked about her death, about how hard it had been to lose her, about how he regretted not spending more time with her in her final years. It was a good performance. I had to give him that. He sounded sincere. He sounded like a grieving widower who had been unfairly cut out of his wife's will. If I had not known the truth, I might have believed him. Richard Brennan asked him about the separation. My father said it had been temporary, that he had just needed some space to clear his head, that he had always intended to come back. He said my mother had understood that. He said they had talked about reconciling. He said if she had lived longer, they probably would have gotten back together. I wanted to scream. It was all lies. My mother had never said anything about reconciling. She had never talked about him coming back. She had made peace with his absence years ago. But he was sitting up there, under oath, telling a story that made him look like a devoted husband who had just needed a little time apart. Patricia stood up for cross-examination. She asked him when exactly he had planned to come back. He said he had not set a specific date. She asked if he had told my mother he was coming back. He said they had discussed it. She asked when. He said he could not remember exactly. She asked if it was before or after she got sick. He hesitated. He said he thought it was before, but he was not sure. She asked him how many times he had visited my mother in the hospital. He said a few times. She asked him to be specific. He said 2 or 3 times. She pulled out hospital visitor logs. She said the records showed he had visited exactly twice in 2 years. He said the records must be incomplete. She asked if he was suggesting the hospital had failed to record his visits. He said maybe he had not signed in every time. She asked if he was aware that signing in was required for all visitors. He said he must have forgotten. She asked him about the funeral. She asked if he had helped plan it. He said no, I had handled that. She asked if he had contributed financially to the funeral costs. He said no, he had assumed my mother's estate would cover it. She asked if he had offered to help. He said he had not wanted to interfere. She asked if he had contacted me at all in the 2 weeks between the funeral and when he filed his legal claim. He said no. She asked why not. He said he had been grieving. She asked if he had been too grief-stricken to call his daughter, but not too grief-stricken to hire a lawyer. He said that was not fair. She asked him about the will. She asked if he had known my mother had made a will. He said yes. She asked if he had known what was in it. He said no. She asked if he had ever asked. He said no. She asked why not. He said it had not seemed important at the time. She asked when it had become important. He did not answer right away. She asked again. He said when he realized he had been cut out. She asked him if he thought he deserved half of the estate. He said yes. She asked why. He said because he had been married to my mother for 43 years. She asked if he thought those 43 years entitled him to override my mother's explicit wishes. He said he thought his rights as a spouse should be respected. She asked if he thought my mother had been of sound mind when she made her will. He hesitated. He said he did not know. She asked if he had any evidence that she had not been of sound mind. He said no, but he thought it was suspicious that she had cut him out completely. She asked him if he had considered that maybe my mother had cut him out because he had left. He said that was not fair. She asked what was not fair about it. He said he had still been her husband. She asked if he had acted like her husband. He said he had done his best. She asked if his best had included visiting her twice in 2 years while she was dying. He said that was a low blow. She said she was just asking questions. She asked if he had any other explanation for why my mother might have left everything to me instead of him. He said I must have influenced her. She asked if he had any proof of that. He said no, but it was the only thing that made sense. Patricia sat down. My father stepped down from the witness stand. He looked rattled, his face flushed, his hands trembling slightly. He did not look at me as he walked back to his table. The judge called a recess for lunch. I walked out of the courtroom in a daze. Patricia took me to a small cafe across the street, a place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of grilled cheese and tomato soup. I ordered coffee but could not drink it. She told me I had done well. She told me my father had not done well. She told me she thought we had a good chance. But I could not shake the feeling that nothing was certain. I had seen the judge's face, impassive and unreadable. I had no idea what she was thinking, which way she was leaning. I felt like my entire life was balanced on a knife's edge, and I had no control over which way it would fall. We went back to the courtroom after lunch. The afternoon sun was streaming through the high windows, making dust motes dance in the air. The room felt warmer, stuffier. I could smell someone's perfume, something floral and too sweet, mixing with the smell of old wood and paper. Richard Brennan called more witnesses. He called a neighbor who testified that my father used to visit the house regularly, which was not true. Patricia cross-examined and got the neighbor to admit that by regularly he meant maybe once every few months, and that he had not seen my father at all in the last few years. He called a co-worker of my father's who testified that my father had talked about his wife all the time, that he had clearly loved her. Patricia cross-examined and got the co-worker to admit that talking about someone and actually being there for them were two different things. It went on for hours. Witness after witness, question after question, the same ground covered over and over again. I felt numb, exhausted, wrung out. I wanted it to be over. I wanted to know one way or another what was going to happen to my life. Finally, as the afternoon light was fading and the courtroom was growing dim, the judge said she had heard enough. She said she would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. She thanked everyone for their time and dismissed us. 2 weeks. I had to wait 2 more weeks to find out if I would lose everything. I walked out of the courthouse into the cool October evening. The air smelled like fallen leaves and car exhaust. People were walking past on the sidewalk, going about their normal lives, completely unaware that my world was falling apart. My father was standing by his car in the parking lot. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I thought maybe he would say something, maybe he would walk over and we could talk like human beings instead of adversaries. But he just got in his car and drove away. Patricia drove me home. She told me to try not to worry, that worrying would not change anything. She told me to take care of myself, to eat something, to get some sleep. She told me she would call me as soon as she heard anything. I thanked her and got out of the car and walked up the path to my front door, to the house that might not be mine much longer. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it that morning. The coffee cup I had not drunk from was still on the counter. The toast I had not eaten was still on the plate. The morning newspaper was still folded on the table. It felt like I had been gone for years instead of hours. I walked through the room slowly, touching things. The couch where my mother used to sit and read. The kitchen table where we had eaten 1,000 meals. The bookshelf full of her favorite novels. The photographs on the mantel showing our life together, birthday parties and holidays and ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now felt precious beyond measure. I went upstairs to her bedroom. I had not changed anything since she died. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Her favorite blanket was still folded at the foot of the bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and I let myself cry, really cry, for the first time since the funeral. I cried for my mother, for the unfairness of losing her so young. I cried for my father, for the relationship we had never had and never would have. I cried for myself, for the fear and exhaustion and loneliness that had become my constant companions. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I went to work and went through the motions, but I could not focus on anything. I would find myself staring at my computer screen, reading the same email over and over without comprehending a single word. My coworkers asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I was not fine. I could not sleep. I would lie awake at night, my mind racing through every possible outcome. If I lost, where would I go? I could not afford to rent an apartment and buy my father out of the house. I would have to move, to leave behind everything my mother had wanted me to have. I would have to start over with nothing. And my father would get the house, would probably sell it immediately, would pocket the money and move on with his life, while I was left with nothing but grief and anger. If I won, what then? Would my father ever speak to me again? Did I even want him to? We had barely had a relationship before this. Now, after everything that had been said in that courtroom, after all the accusations and lies and hurt, was there anything left to salvage? I realized I did not know which outcome scared me more. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and organizing closets. I worked in the garden, pulling weeds and trimming bushes and planting bulbs for spring, even though I did not know if I would be there to see them bloom. I cooked elaborate meals I did not eat. I watched television without seeing it. I existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for Patricia to call and tell me my fate. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work, sitting in a meeting about quarterly projections, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I saw Patricia's name on the screen, and my heart stopped. I excused myself and walked quickly to the hallway, my hands shaking as I answered. She said the judge had issued her ruling. Her voice was calm, professional, giving nothing away. She said I should come to her office. She said we should discuss it in person. I said I could not wait. I needed to know now. There was a pause, and then she said it. We won. I had to sit down. My legs just gave out, and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of the office hallway, the industrial carpet rough under my palms, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I asked her to repeat it. She said we won. The judge had ruled in my favor. The will would stand. The house was mine. I do not remember what else she said. Something about the details of the ruling, about how my father could appeal but she did not think he would, about how I should come by the office to sign some papers. I agreed to everything. I hung up the phone and I sat there on the floor and I cried again, but this time it was relief, pure overwhelming relief. I went back to my desk and told my boss I needed to leave for the day. I drove home in a daze, the autumn sun bright and warm through the windshield, the trees along the road blazing with red and gold leaves. Everything looked sharper, clearer, more vivid than it had in months. I felt like I could breathe again. When I got home, I walked through the house again, but this time it felt different. It was mine. Really mine. My mother had wanted me to have it, and now I did. No one could take it away from me. I went out to the garden and I sat on the bench my mother used to sit on, surrounded by her roses, and I felt her presence so strongly it was like she was sitting next to me. I whispered thank you to the air, to her memory, to whatever part of her still existed somewhere. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for making sure I would be okay. Thank you for loving me enough to give me this gift. That evening, I called my mother's best friend Margaret. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. I told her the news. She cried, happy tears this time. She said my mother would be so proud of me. She said my mother had known this might happen, that my father might try to contest the will, and that was why she had been so careful to make everything legal and clear. She said my mother had talked about it, had said she hoped I would be strong enough to fight if I had to. I asked Margaret why my mother had never told me that. Margaret was quiet for a moment, and then she said my mother had not wanted to burden me with worry. She had hoped it would not come to this. She had hoped my father would respect her wishes, but she had prepared for the possibility that he would not. I felt a wave of love for my mother, so strong it almost knocked me over. Even in death, she had been protecting me. Even knowing she would not be there to help, she had done everything she could to make sure I would be okay. Margaret asked me how I was feeling. I said I did not know. Relieved, yes. Grateful, yes. but also sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my father and I had destroyed what little relationship we had over money and property. Sad that my mother's death had brought out the worst in both of us. Margaret said something then that I have never forgotten. She said that sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to believe them. She said my father had shown me who he was, not just in the last 6 months, but over the last 20 years. She said he had chosen to leave, chosen to stay away, chosen to fight me for an inheritance instead of supporting me through grief. She said those were his choices, not mine. She said I could not control what he did, only how I responded. She said my mother had made her choice too. She had chosen me. She had chosen to give me the house and the security and the future she had worked so hard to build. She said I should honor that choice by living well, by making the most of the gift I had been given, by not letting guilt or sadness or anger poison what should be a blessing. I thanked her. We talked for a while longer, about small things, ordinary things, the kind of comfortable conversation that feels like a warm blanket. When we hung up, I felt calmer than I had in months. I went to Patricia's office the next day to sign the papers. The process was surprisingly simple after all the drama. A few signatures, a few official stamps, and it was done. The house was legally, irrevocably mine. Patricia shook my hand and congratulated me. She said I had been brave. She said my mother would be proud. I thanked her for everything she had done, for fighting for me, for believing in me. She said it had been her honor. As I was leaving, she mentioned that my father's lawyer had called. He had informed her that my father would not be appealing the decision. It was over. Really truly over. I drove home slowly, taking the long way, past the park where my mother used to take me to feed the ducks, past the library where we had spent countless Saturday afternoons, past the ice cream shop where we had celebrated every good report card and birthday. The town looked the same as it always had, but I felt different. Lighter. Freer. Like I had been carrying a weight I had not even realized was there until it was gone. Over the next few weeks, I started to make the house truly mine. I kept most of my mother's things, the furniture and photographs and books that held her memory. But I also started to add my own touches. I painted the guest bedroom a soft green color I had always loved. I bought new curtains for the living room. I planted new flowers in the garden, mixing them with my mother's roses. I was not erasing her. I was building on what she had given me, creating something that was both hers and mine. I thought about my father sometimes. I wondered if he regretted what he had done, if he lay awake at night thinking about the daughter he had lost. I wondered if he told himself he had been right, that he had been fighting for what was fair. I wondered if he ever admitted, even to himself, that he had been wrong. I did not call him. He did not call me. The silence between us stretched on, days turning into weeks, turning into months. I told myself I was okay with it. I told myself I did not need a father who only wanted me when there was something to gain. I told myself I was better off alone. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the loss of him like a physical ache. Not the father he was, but the father he could have been. The father who would have supported me through my grief instead of adding to it. The father who would have respected my mother's wishes instead of fighting them. The father who would have chosen his daughter over money. That father had never existed. Maybe he never could have existed. Maybe my father was only capable of being who he was, selfish and distant and unable to see past his own wants. Maybe I had spent my whole life for something that was never going to happen. Margaret told me once that grief is not just for the dead. You can grieve for the living too, for the relationships that never were, for the love that was never given. I was grieving for my father, for the connection we had never had and never would have. And that grief was just as real and just as painful as my grief for my mother. But I had something my father did not have. I had a home. I had security. I had the knowledge that my mother had loved me enough to fight for my future, even when she knew she would not be there to see it. I had her gift, and I was determined not to waste it. I started taking classes at the community college, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time or money for. I studied art history and creative writing and psychology. I made friends, people who knew nothing about my family drama, who liked me for who I was instead of what I had or did not have. I started to build a life that was mine, not defined by my mother's death or my father's absence, but by my own choices and dreams. The first Christmas without my mother was hard. The house felt too empty, too quiet. I put up a tree, a small one in the corner of the living room, and I decorated it with the ornaments my mother had collected over the years. Each one had a story. The glass angel from her grandmother, the wooden snowman I had made in second grade, the silver bell from our trip to New York when I was 12. I hung them all carefully, and with each one I whispered a memory, a thank you, a goodbye. I invited Margaret over for Christmas dinner. We cooked together in my mother's kitchen, using her recipes, her pots and pans, her favorite serving dishes. We told stories about her, laughing and crying in equal measure. We toasted her with wine from a bottle she had been saving for a special occasion. It felt right to open it, to celebrate her life and her love and the legacy she had left behind. Margaret asked me if I had heard from my father. I said no. She asked if I wanted to. I said I did not know. Part of me wanted him to reach out, to apologize, to try to make things right. Part of me never wanted to hear from him again. She said that was okay, that I did not have to decide right now, that I could take all the time I needed to figure out what I wanted. But as the months passed, I realized I did not want anything from him. I did not want an apology that would probably not be sincere. I did not want a relationship built on obligation and guilt. I did not want to spend the rest of my life trying to earn love from someone who had never been capable of giving it freely. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to build a life that honored my mother's memory without being trapped by the past. I wanted to be happy, truly happy, in the home she had given me. Spring came, and the bulbs I had planted in the fall pushed up through the soil, bright green shoots that promised color and life. My mother's roses bloomed, filling the air with their sweet perfume. I sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, listening to the birds sing, feeling the warm breeze on my skin. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, and I felt at peace. One day in May, almost a year after my mother's death, I was working in the garden when a car pulled up in front of the house. I looked up, my hands dirty from planting, and I saw my father getting out. My heart started pounding. I had not seen him since the courtroom, had not spoken to him since that phone call when I had hung up on him. I did not know what he wanted. I did not know if I wanted to know. He walked up the path slowly, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He looked older, more tired. He stopped a few feet away from me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. The air was thick with everything unsaid, all the hurt and anger and disappointment that had built up over the years. He said my name, just my name, soft and uncertain. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands, and I waited. He said he had been thinking about me. He said he had been thinking about everything that had happened. He said he wanted to talk. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. He said he wanted to explain. He wanted me to understand why he had done what he had done. I said I understood perfectly. He had wanted money. He had wanted the house. He had been willing to destroy our relationship to get it. What else was there to understand? He flinched like I had hit him. He said it was not that simple. He said he had been hurt when he found out my mother had left him nothing. He said he had felt betrayed, like their entire marriage had meant nothing. He said he had reacted badly, that he had let his hurt turn into anger, that he had made mistakes. I asked him if he was apologizing. He said he was trying to. I asked him if he thought an apology would fix everything. He said no, but he hoped it might be a start. I looked at him, this man who was my father but who felt like a stranger. I thought about all the years of absence, all the missed birthdays and holidays and ordinary days. I thought about my mother dying without him by her side. I thought about the courtroom and the lawyers and the months of fear and stress. I thought about everything he had put me through, everything he had chosen over me. And I thought about what Margaret had said, that I could not control what he did, only how I responded. That I had a choice about what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of life I wanted to live. I said I appreciated him coming. I said I was glad he recognized he had made mistakes. But I said I was not ready to forgive him. Maybe I never would be. Too much had happened. Too much damage had been done. I said I needed him to respect that, to give me space, to let me live my life without him in it. He looked like he wanted to argue, to push back, to make me understand. But then something in his face changed. He nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said if I ever changed my mind, if I ever wanted to talk, he would be there. He said he was sorry, truly sorry, for everything. He turned and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, yes. Relief, yes. But also a kind of closure. He had come. He had apologized. And I had told him the truth. I did not owe him anything more than that. I went back to my gardening, my hands in the soil, the sun warm on my back. The house stood behind me, solid and safe, mine in every way that mattered. My mother's roses bloomed around me, their scent sweet and strong. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, like everything was going to be okay. The years that followed were good years. Not perfect, not without their challenges, but good. I finished my degree at the community college and then transferred to a university to study social work. I wanted to help people, to be there for others the way my mother had been there for me. I wanted to turn my pain into something useful, something that could make a difference. I met someone, a kind man named David, who worked at the library and loved old movies and made me laugh. We took things slow, both of us carrying our own histories, our own hurts. But slowly, carefully, we built something real. He understood about my mother, about the house, about why it mattered so much to me. He never tried to change anything or push me to move on faster than I was ready. He just loved me steadily and patiently, and that was enough. We got married in the garden, surrounded by my mother's roses. Margaret was there, and my college friends, and David's family, who welcomed me with open arms. My father was not there. I had not invited him. David had asked me if I was sure, if I might regret it later. I said I was sure. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Some relationships, once broken, cannot be fixed. And that was okay. I had made peace with it. We lived in the house together, David and I. We painted more rooms and fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom and replaced the old furnace. We made it ours while still honoring what it had been. We hung our wedding photos next to pictures of my mother. We planted a vegetable garden next to her roses. We filled the rooms with laughter and music and the ordinary sounds of a happy life. I thought about my mother every day, not with the sharp, cutting grief of those first months, but with a gentle sadness mixed with gratitude. I was grateful for the years we had together. I was grateful for the lessons she taught me. I was grateful for the home she gave me, not just the physical house, but the sense of safety and love that made it a home. I thought about my father less often. Sometimes I would see a man who looked like him from behind, and my heart would skip a beat. Sometimes I would hear a song he used to like and feel a pang of something I could not quite name. But mostly he was just a shadow, a might have been, a road not taken. I did not hate him. I did not love him. I just accepted that he was who he was, and I was who I was, and we were not meant to be in each other's lives. Margaret told me once that forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment. She said I did not have to have a relationship with my father to forgive him. I could forgive him and still keep my distance. I could forgive him and still protect myself. I thought about that a lot. I thought about what forgiveness meant, what it looked like, whether I was capable of it. And slowly, over time, I realized that maybe I had already forgiven him. Not in a dramatic moment of reconciliation, not with tears and apologies and promises to do better, but quietly, gradually, by choosing to let go of the anger that had been eating away at me, by choosing to focus on what I had instead of what I had lost, by choosing to be happy despite everything he had done. I forgave him by living well, by making the most of the gift my mother had given me, by building a life full of love and purpose and joy. That was my forgiveness, and it was enough. David and I had a daughter. We named her after my mother. She had my mother's blue eyes and her gentle spirit. Watching her grow up in the house where I had grown up felt like coming full circle, like the story was continuing in a way my mother would have loved. I told her stories about her grandmother, about the woman she was named after. I showed her pictures and taught her to garden and made sure she knew she came from love, that she was part of a legacy of strong women who took care of each other. One afternoon when my daughter was 5, we were sitting on the porch swing, the same swing where I had my first kiss all those years ago. She was eating a popsicle, the juice dripping down her chin, her legs swinging back and forth. She asked me about my daddy. She knew about David's parents, who visited often and spoiled her rotten. But she had noticed that I never talked about my father, that there were no pictures of him in the house. I thought about how to answer. I thought about lying, about making up some story that would be easier for her to understand. But I had promised myself I would always be honest with her, that I would never hide the truth the way so many people in my family had hidden things from each other. I told her that my daddy and I did not talk anymore. I told her that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love, and sometimes those hurts are too big to fix. I told her that it made me sad sometimes, but that I was okay. I had her and David and Margaret and all the people who loved me. I had this house and this garden and all the memories of her grandmother. I had everything I needed. She thought about that for a moment, her face serious. Then she said that was sad. I agreed. It was sad. But sad things happen sometimes, and we survive them. We find ways to be happy anyway. She nodded like she understood, even though I knew she was too young to really grasp it all. But someday she would understand. Someday she would face her own disappointments and betrayals and losses. And I hoped that by then I would have taught her how to survive them, how to choose happiness, how to build a good life even when things do not go the way you planned. My father died when my daughter was 7. I got a call from a hospital in the next state over. He had been living there for the past few years, apparently. He had had a heart attack. By the time they found my number in his phone, he was already gone. The nurse who called me was kind, her voice gentle as she gave me the details. She asked if I wanted to come identify the body, make arrangements. I said I would. David offered to come with me, but I said I needed to do this alone. I drove the 3 hours to the hospital, the landscape blurring past my windows, my mind strangely blank. I did not know what I was supposed to feel. Grief? Relief? Anger that he had died before we could ever fix things? Guilt that I had not tried harder to reconcile? I felt nothing. Just a strange emptiness, like I was going through the motions of something I was supposed to care about, but did not. The hospital was small and clean, with that antiseptic smell that all hospitals have. A different nurse, older and more businesslike, led me to a room where my father's body lay covered with a white sheet. She pulled back the sheet from his face, and I looked at him. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, the lines of worry and anger smoothed away. He looked like he might have looked if his life had gone differently, if he had made different choices. I said yes, that was him. The nurse covered his face again, and led me to an office where I signed papers and made decisions about what to do with his body. He had not left any instructions, no will, no funeral plans. He had not left much of anything. A small apartment full of second-hand furniture. A bank account with $3,000 in it. A car that barely ran. That was the sum total of his life. I arranged for a simple cremation. I did not plan a funeral. There was no one to invite, no one who would come. He had lived alone and died alone, and that felt like the saddest thing of all. Not that he was dead, but that his life had been so small, so isolated, so empty of connection. I took his ashes home with me. I did not know what else to do with them. They sat in a plain box on my closet shelf for weeks while I tried to figure out what felt right. David suggested scattering them somewhere meaningful, but I could not think of anywhere that had meant something to my father. He had not had a favorite place, had not talked about wanting to be anywhere in particular. He had just drifted through life, never quite landing anywhere. Finally, one evening in late summer, I took the box out to the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My mother's roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the warm air. I opened the box, and I scattered my father's ashes among the roses, mixing him with the soil that grew the flowers my mother had loved. It felt right somehow. He had not been there for her in life, but maybe in death they could be together in this small way. Maybe the roses would grow a little stronger, a little more beautiful, fed by what remained of him. Maybe that was the only legacy he could leave, the only good thing that could come from his existence. I said a prayer, not to any particular God, but just to the universe, to whatever force governs life and death and the strange paths we all walk. I said I hoped he had found peace. I said I hoped he understood, wherever he was, why I had made the choices I made. I said I forgave him, truly forgave him, for all of it. And then I went inside and washed my hands and made dinner for my family. David asked me later if I was okay. I said I was. And I meant it. I was okay. My father's death did not change anything, did not fix anything, did not make the past hurt any less. But it closed the chapter. It let me stop wondering if someday we might reconcile, stop carrying the faint hope that maybe he would change, maybe he would become the father I had always wanted. Now I knew for certain that would never happen, and there was a strange relief in that certainty. I told my daughter that her grandfather had died. She asked if I was sad. I said I was sad for what could have been, but not for what was. She hugged me, her small arms tight around my waist, and said she loved me. I said I loved her too, and I realized that was what mattered. Not the love I had not gotten from my father, but the love I could give to my daughter. Not the family I had lost, but the family I had built. Margaret came over a few days later. I told her about scattering the ashes in the garden. She smiled and said my mother would have liked that. She said my mother had always believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people could be better than they were. She said even though my father had not earned it, my mother would have wanted him to rest in peace. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea, watching my daughter play in the yard. Margaret was getting older, her hair completely white now, her movements slower. But her eyes were still sharp, still kind. She had been there for me through everything, a steady presence when my own family had fallen apart. She had loved my mother, and she loved me, and that love had carried me through the darkest times. She asked me if I had any regrets. I thought about it for a long time. Did I regret not trying harder with my father? Did I regret the years of silence, the missed opportunities for reconciliation? Did I regret the way things had ended, with ashes scattered in a garden instead of a proper goodbye? I said no. I did not regret it. I had done the best I could with what I had. I had protected myself when I needed to. I had chosen my own well-being over a relationship that was only hurting me. I had honored my mother's wishes and built a good life in the home she gave me. Those were not things to regret. Those were things to be proud of. Margaret nodded. She said my mother would be proud of me too. She said I had grown into a strong, kind, capable woman, and that was the best tribute I could give to my mother's memory. She said the house was not just walls and a roof. It was a symbol of everything my mother had wanted for me. Safety, security, a place to build a life. And I had done that. I had taken her gift and made something beautiful with it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the evening air cooling, the fireflies starting to blink in the growing darkness. My daughter caught one in her hands and brought it over to show us, her face glowing with delight. We admired it together, and then she opened her hands and let it fly away, watching it disappear into the night. That moment felt like a metaphor for everything. Holding something precious for a moment, appreciating it, and then letting it go. That was what I had learned to do. Hold the good memories of my mother, appreciate the gift she had given me, and let go of the pain and anger and disappointment. Hold the hope that my father could have been better, appreciate the few good moments we had shared, and let go of the resentment that he had not been the father I needed. Let go. Move forward. Build something new. The house on Maple Street still stands, white with blue shutters, roses blooming along the fence every summer. It is full of life now, full of laughter and love and the ordinary chaos of a family living their lives. My daughter is growing up in the same rooms where I grew up, making her own memories, building her own story. Sometimes I walk through the rooms, and I can still feel my mother's presence. Not in a ghostly way, but in the way a place holds the energy of the people who loved it. I can feel her in the kitchen, where she made 1,000 meals. I can feel her in the garden where she spent countless hours nurturing life from the soil. I can feel her in the living room where we sat together on quiet evenings, reading or talking or just being together. And sometimes, very rarely, I can feel my father too. Not the angry, bitter man he became, but the father he was when I was very small, before everything fell apart. The father who taught me to ride a bike, who read me bedtime stories, who carried me on his shoulders. That father existed, even if only briefly. And I choose to remember him, to hold on to those few good memories, even as I acknowledge all the ways he failed me later. Because that is what it means to be human. We are all complicated, all flawed, all capable of both great love and great harm. My mother was not perfect. She had her own faults, her own mistakes. But she loved me fiercely, and she did her best to give me a good life. My father was not a monster. He was just a weak man who made selfish choices and could not see past his own pain. Both things can be true at the same time. I teach my daughter this. I teach her that people are complicated, that families are messy, that love is not always enough, but it is still worth giving. I teach her to be strong, to stand up for herself, to know her own worth. I teach her to be kind, to forgive when she can, to let go when she must. I teach her that home is not just a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging, a knowledge that you are loved and safe and valued. And I teach her about her grandmother, the woman who made all of this possible. I tell her stories about my mother's kindness, her strength, her unwavering love. I show her the garden and explain how her grandmother planted every rose, how she tended them with such care, how she believed that beauty was worth the effort it took to create it. I tell her that her grandmother wanted her to have this house, this legacy, this foundation on which to build her own life. My daughter listens with wide eyes, absorbing it all. She asks questions. She wants to know everything. And I answer as honestly as I can, giving her the truth in age-appropriate pieces, building a picture of the grandmother she never got to meet, but who loved her anyway, who made choices that would affect her life even though they would never meet. That is the power of legacy. It reaches forward through time, touching lives that have not yet been lived, shaping futures that have not yet unfolded. My mother's legacy is not just the house or the money. It is the values she instilled in me, the strength she gave me, the love she showed me. And I am passing that legacy on to my daughter, who will someday pass it on to her own children, and on, a chain of love and strength stretching into a future my mother could only imagine. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I always spend time in the garden. It has become a ritual, a way of honoring her memory. I tend the roses, pulling weeds and deadheading spent blooms, and making sure everything is healthy and thriving. I talk to her, telling her about my life, about my daughter, about all the ways I am trying to live up to the gift she gave me. I thank her, over and over, for everything. And I feel her answer in the warmth of the sun on my face, in the sweet scent of the roses, in the solid presence of the house behind me. She is not gone, not really. She lives on in this place, in me and my daughter. She lives on in every choice I make to be kind, to be strong, to be the person she raised me to be. The legal battle with my father feels like a lifetime ago now, even though it has only been a handful of years. The fear and anger and stress have faded, replaced by a calm certainty that I did the right thing. I fought for what my mother wanted. I protected her legacy. I refused to let anyone take away what she had worked so hard to give me. And in doing so, I learned that I was stronger than I thought, braver than I knew, more capable than I had ever imagined. That knowledge has served me well. When challenges come, and they always do, I remember that I survived the worst thing I could imagine. I lost my mother. I fought my father. I stood in a courtroom and defended my right to exist in the space my mother had carved out for me. If I could survive that, I can survive anything. David tells me sometimes that I am the strongest person he knows. I laugh and say I do not feel strong. I feel like I am just doing what needs to be done, putting one foot in front of the other, making it through each day as best I can. But he says that is what strength is. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the willingness to keep going despite it. The willingness to build a life even when everything feels broken. The willingness to love even when you have been hurt. Maybe he is right. Maybe strength is not about being invincible. Maybe it is about being vulnerable and scared and hurt, and choosing to keep going anyway. Maybe it is about falling apart and then putting yourself back together, piece by piece, until you're whole again. Maybe it is about taking the broken pieces of your life and making something beautiful out of them. That is what I have tried to do. Take the grief and the anger and the disappointment and transform them into something better. Take the house my mother left me and turn it into a home full of love and laughter. Take the lessons I learned from my father's failures and use them to be a better parent to my own child. Take the pain and make it mean something. I think my mother would be proud of that. I think she would look at the life I have built and smile. I think she would see her granddaughter playing in the garden and feel joy. I think she would know that her sacrifice, her careful planning, her determination to give me a future was worth it. And my father, wherever he is, I hope he has found peace. I hope he understands now what he could not understand in life. I hope he sees that love is not about possession or control or getting what you think you deserve. Love is about giving, about sacrifice, about wanting the best for someone even when it costs you something. My mother understood that. She loved me enough to give me everything, to plan for my future, to fight for me even from beyond the grave. My father never learned that lesson. He loved, in his way, but it was a selfish love, a love that asked what he could get rather than what he could give. And in the end, that kind of love leaves you with nothing. No relationships, no legacy, just ashes scattered in a garden, feeding roses you will never see bloom. I do not want that for my daughter. I want her to know love that is generous and unconditional. I want her to grow up secure in the knowledge that she is valued for who she is, not for what she can give or what she represents. I want her to understand that family is not just about blood, but about showing up, about being there, about choosing each other day after day. Margaret is family, even though we share no blood. She has been there for me in ways my father never was. She has loved me and supported me and believed in me. She is my daughter's honorary grandmother, the one who comes to school plays and birthday parties and ordinary Tuesday dinners. She is the one who will be remembered, who will leave a legacy of love and presence and care. That is what I want to be for my daughter. Not perfect, because perfection is impossible, and trying to achieve it will only lead to disappointment. But present, loving, supportive, someone she can count on, someone who will fight for her, someone who will make sure she has what she needs to build a good life. The house will be hers someday. I have already made sure of that, already drawn up a will that is clear and legally sound. I have learned from my mother's experience. I have made sure there can be no confusion, no contest, no question about what I want. This house, this legacy, will pass to my daughter just as it passed to me. And I hope she will love it as much as I do. I hope she will fill it with her own family, her own memories, her own life. I hope she will tend the roses and remember the women who came before her, who worked and sacrificed and loved to give her this foundation. But if she does not want it, that is okay too. If she wants to sell it and use the money for something else, if she wants to travel the world or start a business or do something I cannot even imagine, that is her choice. The gift is not the house itself. The gift is the freedom to choose, the security to take risks, the knowledge that she has a safety net. That is what my mother gave me, and that is what I will give my daughter. Because in the end, that is what love is. Giving someone the tools they need to build their own life, and then trusting them to use those tools wisely. Not controlling, not manipulating, not demanding gratitude or obedience. Just giving, freely and fully, and then stepping back and watching them become who they are meant to be. My mother did that for me. She gave me everything she could, and then she let go, trusting that I would be okay. And I was okay. I am okay. I am more than okay. I am happy, fulfilled, surrounded by love. I have built a life that honors her memory and her sacrifice. I have taken her gift and made it into something beautiful. That is the story nobody imagines when they hear about a daughter fighting her father for an inheritance. They imagine greed, selfishness, a family torn apart by money. And yes, there was pain and conflict and loss. But there was also love, so much love. A mother's love that reached beyond death to protect her child. A daughter's love that fought to honor her mother's wishes. A wife's love that supported her husband through grief and anger. A friend's love that provided comfort and wisdom. A grandmother's love that shaped a child who never got to meet her. Love is what made the fight worth it. Love is what gave me the strength to stand up to my father, to endure the courtroom and the lawyers and the months of uncertainty. Love is what made the house more than just property, more than just money. It was a symbol of everything my mother wanted for me, everything she believed I deserved. And I got it. I won. Not just the legal battle, but the bigger battle of building a life worth living. I won the right to be happy, to be safe, to be home. I won the chance to pass on my mother's legacy to my daughter. I won the knowledge that I am strong enough to face whatever comes next. Nobody imagines what really happened. They see the surface, the conflict, the drama. They do not see the love underneath it all. They do not see the years of my mother's careful planning, making sure I would be taken care of. They do not see the strength it took to stand up for myself, to fight for what was right even when it meant losing my father. They do not see the healing that came after, the slow process of building a new life from the ashes of the old one. But I know. I lived it, and I will make sure my daughter knows too. I will tell her the whole story, not just the easy parts but the hard parts too. I will tell her about her grandmother's love and her grandfather's failures. I will tell her about the courtroom and the fear and the ultimate victory. I will tell her so she understands where she comes from, what she is built on, what legacy she carries. And I will tell her that she has a choice. She can carry that legacy forward, or she can create her own. She can live in this house, or she can make her home somewhere else. She can follow in my footsteps, or she can forge her own path. Whatever she chooses, I will support her. Whatever she decides, I will love her. Because that is what my mother taught me. Love is not about control. It is about freedom. It is about giving someone wings and then trusting them to fly. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I am sitting on the porch, the same porch where I have sat 1,000 times before. My daughter is inside doing homework. David is making dinner, and I can smell garlic and tomatoes and fresh bread. The roses are blooming, filling the air with their sweet perfume. The house is solid and warm behind me, full of life and love and the promise of tomorrow. This is home. This is what my mother fought for. This is what I fought for. This is what I will pass on to my daughter. Not just a house, but a legacy of love and strength and the courage to fight for what matters. Nobody imagines what really happened. But I know, and that is enough.